We know that 5 people were involved in this crash, one of those people sadly dying just within the last couple of minutes here. We've learned that inside of the plane that was parked here and was hit, no one had any injuries on board of that plane. But you could still see out here tonight, hours after this happened, still some fire crews out here. The airport is still closed. Scottsdale Fire says the left main gear failed on the jet that was landing. We have video showing the moments that led up to this crash. Let's take a listen to that again. Yeah, just some really scary moments here. You can see in that video a Learjet 35A. It was coming in from Austin, skidding off the runway after landing and crashing into a parked plane. Scottsdale's Fire says one person died, and at last update we got from fire officials around 6:30, they said the person was still trapped inside the plane, meaning crews had been working for hours to get that person out. We are told 3 other people were hospitalized. 2 of them are in critical condition. Now, when getting here to the scene earlier, there was a gassy smell in the air. Scottsdale Fire says they had crews from Scottsdale, Phoenix, and Glendale responding to this crash, but also to make sure the surrounding areas were safe.
We brought in additional hazmat units to clear the buildings, surrounding buildings, and get an all clear in those structures. And they also metered those structures and got 0 readings in those structures.
Now, tonight we have learned the plane that veered off the runway was owned by Vince Neil, the lead singer of the band Motley Crue. His team tells us Neil was not on board the plane, but that 2 pilots and 2 passengers were inside. Tonight we are trying to learn their identities. Now, the NTSB is now taking over this investigation. There is still no timeline on when the runway will open back up here in Scottsdale. Once we learn some more about that and more on the people who were involved in this accident, we will make sure to keep you updated on air and online.
We've got ones that can see. Welcome to today's show. It's not every day that airplanes crash on a runway, and it's certainly not every day that 2 quote-unquote celebrity airplanes crash on a runway. And of course, it's not every day that one of the celebrities whose plane crashed happened to have somebody on board who died, and the owner of that plane happened to be a well-renowned Satanist. So as you heard, Vince Neil of Motley Crue, his plane crashed on a runway. He conveniently was not on board that plane, and there was a victim who lost their life. Now, we know of all the stories that are out there about plane crashes, the autonomous airplanes being pushed into normalcy, the air traffic controllers going and turning to artificial intelligence. Now, this could tie into those things, of course, with disasters on the runway, planes not being able to brake properly, one plane in one location it's not supposed to be versus another. Of course, we know how they've been pushing this with autonomous vehicles to get people on board with self-driving cars and how much safer it is and how those cars will automatically stop before crashing into anything. So I'm sure that ties into this as well, because every day that there's another story about planes crashing is another day that people get nervous about flying and want change to the infrastructure. But I'm covering this story because of the fact that it's Vince Neil whose plane crashed, and it supposedly crashed into Vince Vaughn, the other Hollywood celebrity whose plane happened to be parked in that runway. Of course, neither celebrity was on board of the plane, and there was a casualty. Now, for anyone out there that doesn't know, so why am I covering Vince Neil? Why am I talking about a self-professed Satanist? Well, anyway out there, if you don't know, Motley Crue is notorious for being one of the more satanic bands out there. Of course, they get away with this stuff, as a lot of 80s bands did, because they think that it's some type of an act, and that's how they get ratings, and that's how people buy their records, because apparently Satan sells, right? That's one of the mottos that they put out there, along with the Satanic Panic, to get away with, of course, expressing and promoting Satanism out in the public eye, and then getting their followers on board to do things like wear upside-down pentagrams and yell and scream, shout at the devil, and hold up devil horns. This is just one of the album covers of Motley Crue with the upside down pentagram. But I'll prove to you that it's more than just a show with these people. It's more than just using pentagrams on their album covers and screaming and singing and worshiping the devil in their lyrics. Oh, it goes deeper than that. But let's start with this, because we know about sacrifice. We know these celebrities are always surrounded by very bizarre stories of sacrifice. Well, if you didn't know, Vince Neil had a car crash many years ago. He was involved in a car accident that killed someone while he was drunk and driving under the influence. Now, of course, like most of the time with these celebrities, whether it's Matthew Broderick or any other celebrity that's linked to a death, a vehicular death, they just seem to be able to get away with it and serve no jail time. In this case, Vince Neil was drinking and driving, killed somebody from drinking and driving. And what was his crime? 20 days in jail. And of course, that's because this is how this system works. When human sacrifice occurs, there's no price to be paid for any of these people. Now, Vince Vaughn has been on magazine covers doing the all-seeing eye, obviously covering one eye with his hair. We've seen them use the pentagrams on their drum sets before, even taking photographs, wearing shirts that say 666 on it. You could see them performing a satanic ritual under the upside-down Baphomet pentagram. But really what I want to get into, since this is such a bizarre story about how somebody died, very reminiscent to how Vince Neil ended up killing somebody many years ago behind the wheel of his car and got away with it. Well, in this case, his plane just happened to kill somebody. And there's this tie-ins to Satanism, and we all know how human sacrifice works. So Vince Neil in this picture is with the Motley Crue band's driver. You could see this guy with the mustache in multiple photographs with the band, which shows his connection to these people. And in a recent interview that I covered a couple of years ago, listen to this about what he recalls in regards to driving Motley Crue around Hollywood. He said he recalls taking various members to creepy ceremonies and rituals around Los Angeles. Al says bassist Nikki Sixx was particularly interested in the, quote, dark arts, and he once gave him a famous occultist, Anton LaVey, who founded the Church of Satan, a lift to a strange ceremony at a house behind the famous Whiskey A Go-Go nightclub in Hollywood. Quote, I remember them having an interest in satanic rituals, and I used to take them to these weird parties at an old mansion in Hollywood where there'd be people doing all kinds of creepy stuff. Nikki was very much into the black arts, Aleister Crowley, incantations, witchcraft, and all of that stuff. I drove him once with Anton LaVey, and they were doing these weird chants. I had an intercom system, so if they put up the divider in the limo, I would just turn on the intercom and listen to everything that was going on. So I heard everything they were talking about. Then I dropped them at this strange house covered in ivy behind the Whiskey Go-Go. There was some weird ceremony there, and it was full of up-and-coming actresses, and they were all into this stuff. They were in circles, and there were candles, and blood, and horsehair, all kinds of weird stuff. At the time, I just thought, it's Hollywood. It's all a big horror show anyway. I said, you guys making a horror movie about witchcraft or something? But it seemed like serious business for them. Nikki would call on spiritual forces. I remember asking him, what's the deal with all this stuff? Are you trying to call on angels from heaven to guide the band? He said, no, I'm trying to conjure up demons from hell to guide the band. So I was like, so you're calling them up, not down. It was kind of funny. So that's an interview with their limo driver, who reportedly took them all around Hollywood to mysterious homes, which, happened to be covered in ivy so that nobody could find or see these locations that they were occurring in. And they make you think that these rituals were what? What does somebody think when they hear these satanic rituals? I know most people don't believe it. We have Aleister Crowley mentioned. We have Anton LaVey mentioned. Specifically, if you follow the teachings of Aleister Crowley, if you understand what he teaches to those who follow him, I should say, he talks about human sacrifice in his books that these people read. And they have said in this interview that they followed Aleister Crowley. So now you have a direct connection to Satanism with this band. It's not just about upside down pentagrams and them trying to get people to buy their albums by trying to make it seem like it's cool to worship the devil. They literally were involved in satanic rituals. So what do you think those satanic rituals involved? Do you think that they were chanting in circles and they were just there naked and nothing really happened other than them saying that they love Satan? I mean, do people understand how satanic rituals work and how magic actually works? And they talk about invoking demons. Well, they can only invoke these demons through ritual sacrifice. And that's Motley Crue's direct connection to all of this. So yes, you have the narratives that we're going to continue to hear with airplanes. Every day that they could put one of these stories about an airplane out in the public eye, it makes people more hesitant to fly and travel, which is part of a New World Order. Okay, part of your carbon footprint, you're going to fly and travel less. It's part of getting autonomous aircraft to become normalized and AI air traffic control. But I find it awfully interesting that Vince Neil is once again involved in some type of bizarre accident, quote unquote, where he somehow miraculously survived the first car accident, right? As if maybe he was wearing his seatbelt and somebody next to him wasn't, and then he got a slap on the wrist for 20 days for killing somebody, drinking and driving. Not to mention the other victims in his drinking and driving case were left with severe permanent brain damage, right? While he continued to go out and sell albums and perform concerts. And now his plane, at a time where we know the government wants these stories out there about airplanes running amok, having breakdowns, veering off runways, crashing into one another, catching fire, nose diving out of the air, that somebody died, but he was conveniently not on board. Does it sound like a potential ritual sacrifice? Well, that's up to you to decide. But the connection between Vince Neil and Satanism is real. This isn't some random thing that Vince Neil is just dressing up because he likes to dress up, just like all these musicians, right? We're supposed to believe that Kiss, they don't really worship Satan. Marilyn Manson doesn't really worship Satan. AC/DC doesn't really worship Satan. Now, they only admit in their lyrics that they've sold their soul and they worship Satan. People like Bob Dylan, Lady Gaga, Beyonce, they all talk about how they've sold their souls and worship Satan, right? Yet people still think it's some type of joke that gets them publicity, as if it hasn't been done a million times before already. So very bizarre that this occurred. Once I heard this story and I saw it on the news, and I heard even Vince Vaughn was somehow involved, that his plane happened to be the other plane that it crashed into, I immediately thought of all these things I've covered in the past with Motley Crue. How Motley Crue gets glorified, right? Motley Crue, 80s hair rock band. Tommy Lee, so cool, right? Yeah, so cool that the lead singer continues to walk the streets after killing somebody in the car crash, after two people in the other car suffered permanent brain damage. And, he's free. He owns private planes, right? That's how this world works. And you don't hear anybody out there crying for justice for the poor victim of his car accident or the people who are suffering with permanent brain damage, because these Satanists remain protected in our society. So Vince Neil's plane crashes. You could decide for yourself if it was a ritual or not. But you can't ignore the facts that even his limo driver admitted to driving around the band, dropping them off at bizarre houses for satanic rituals, eavesdropping on them in the limo, listening to them talk about this, having Anton LaVey, the founder of the Church of Satan, inside of a limo with them, and of course, their obsession with Aleister Crowley, right? Guess those are all coincidences too, just like this plane mysteriously crashing and killing somebody on a runway. We're supposed to believe, right? I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all doing well. God bless you and your families, as always.